Good afternoon, readers. Last time we met, Despereaux fainted. Do you remember why he fainted? Well, he fainted because the last words that were said to him prior to the fainting, "Very well," said the most very honored head mouse. "You will die then with a black heart. Threadmaster," he called, "bring out the thread." Despereaux marveled at his own bravery. He admired his own defiance. And then, reader, he fainted. And he fainted because although he was brave, he was still a little scared. Have you ever been to somewhere in your life, an event or an activity, or maybe had to do something where you were really trying to be brave, but still you felt scared? I think we all have felt that way. And we can see clearly by Despereaux's fainting that he definitely is feeling that way. So let's find out what happens next in chapter 11 in the Tales of Despereaux. Here we go. Chapter 11, The Threadmaster Cometh. When Despereaux came to, he heard the drum. His father was beating a rhythm that had much more boom and much less tact. Together, Lester and the drum produced an ominous sound that went something like this. Boom, 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 tap, boom, 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 tap. Reader, do you know what the word ominous means? Ominous kind of means spooky, and when you might be watching a cartoon where they try to produce an ominous sound, it might sound something like do 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 do. Try to create a scene of being scary or ominous, meaning not sure what's going to happen. "Make way for the thread!" cried a mouse who was pushing a wooden spool of thread through the crowd. "Make way for the thread!" Boom, 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 tat went the drum. "To the dungeon!" shouted the mice. Despereaux lay on his back, blinking his eyes. How, he wondered, had things gone so terribly wrong? Wasn't it a good thing to love? In the story in the book, love was a very good thing. Because the knight loved the fair maiden, he was able to rescue her. They lived happily ever after. It said so in the book. They were the last words on the page, happily ever after. Despereaux was certain that he had read exactly those words time and time again. Lying on the floor with the drum beating and the mice shouting and the threadmaster calling out, "Make way! Make way!" Despereaux had a sudden, chilling thought. Had some other mouse eaten the words that spoke the truth? Did the knight and the fair maiden really not live happily ever after? Reader, do you believe there is such a thing as happily ever after? Or, like Despereaux, have you too begun to question the possibility of happily ever after? "Happily ever after," whispered Despereaux. "Happily ever after," he said again as a spool of thread came to a stop beside him. "The thread, the thread, the thread," murmured the mice. "I'm sorry," said the mouse behind the spool, "but I have to ask you to stand up. I have to do my job." Despereaux got slowly to his feet. "On your hind legs, please," said the threadmaster. "It's the rules." Despereaux stood on his hind legs. "Thank you," said the mouse. "I appreciate it." While Despereaux watched, the threadmaster unwound a length of red thread from the spool and tied a loop. "Just enough for the neck," muttered the mouse. "No more, no less. That's what the last threadmaster taught me. Enough for the neck." He looked up at Despereaux, then back down at the loop of thread. "And you, my friend, have a small neck." The threadmaster raised his arms and put them around Despereaux's neck. He leaned in close, and Despereaux smelled celery. He could feel the threadmaster's breath in his ears as he worked at tightening the thread. "Is she beautiful?" the threadmaster whispered. "What?" said Despereaux. "Shh! It's a princess! It's a princess beautiful! The Princess P!" And here is a picture, and the caption reads, "Just enough for the neck," muttered the mouse. "No more, no less." And here's a picture of the threadmaster measuring with a little loop. "Yes, she is lovely beyond all imagining," said Despereaux. "Just right," the threadmaster said. He drew back. He nodded his head. A lovely princess, just so, like a fairy tale. And you love her as a knight loves a maiden. You love her with a courtly love, a love that is based on bravery and courtesy and honor and devotion, just so. How do you know that? Despereaux said. How do you know about fairy tales? Shh! The mouse leaned in close, and Despereaux smelled celery again, green and alive. Be brave, friend, whispered the threadmaster. Be brave for the princess. And then he stepped back and turned and shouted, Fellow mice, the thread has been tied. The thread has been knotted. So reader, after listening to the dialogue between the threadmaster and Despereaux, how would you describe the threadmaster? He's very unique in what he says and how he speaks. He asks him, please, to stand up and thank you. And then he basically re-spoke Despereaux's words about honor and love and fairy tales. What does that tell you about the threadmaster? What can you infer from the text? What do you know about the threadmaster that maybe the author, Kate DiCamillo, isn't telling you? I think the threadmaster also can read, just like Despereaux. Otherwise, how would the threadmaster know all of these things? A roar of approval went up from the crowd. Despereaux squared his shoulders. He made a decision. He would do as the threadmaster had suggested. He would be brave for the princess. Even if, reader, could it be true? There was no such thing as happily ever after? Do you believe in happily ever afters? I certainly do. Chapter 12, Adieu. The sound of the drum changed again, and the final tat disappeared, and it became nothing but boom, 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 boom. Lester used only his tail, bringing it down with great force and seriousness upon the drum. The threadmaster retreated. A room full of mice fell silent, expectant, waiting, and as Despereaux stood before them with the red thread around his neck and the 14 members of the Mouse Council perched on the bricks above him, 2 burly mice came forward. Black pieces of cloth covered their heads. There were slits for their eyes. We, said the bigger of the 2 mice, will escort you to the dungeon. Despereaux, Antoinette called out. Ah, my Despereaux! Despereaux looked out into the crowd of mice and saw his mother. She was easy to spot. In honor of her youngest mouse being sent to the dungeon, she had put on a tremendous amount of makeup. Each of the hooded mice put a paw on Despereaux's shoulder. It's time, said the one on the left, the first hood. Antoinette pushed her way through the crowd. He is my son, she said. I want to have a last word with my son. Despereaux looked at his mother. He concentrated on standing before her without trembling. He concentrated on not being a disappointment. Please, said Antoinette, what will happen to him? What will happen to my baby? Ma'am, said the first hood. His voice was deep and slow. You don't want to know. I want to know. I want to know. He is my child, the child of my heart, the last of my mice babies. The hooded mice said nothing. And reader, when I read that, I think to myself, Antoinette said, he is my heart, yet the whole time during the story, they would always make fun of him and say he wasn't good enough or big enough. But now she's sad that he's leaving, and it's a bit ironic, to me. Tell me, said Antoinette. The rats, said the first. The rats, said the second. Yes, yes, we, the rats, what of them? The rats will eat him, said the second hood. Said Antoinette, Mon Dieu! At the thought of being eaten by rats, Despereaux forgot about being brave. He forgot about not being a disappointment. He felt himself heading into another faint. But his mother, who had an excellent sense of dramatic timing, beat him to it. She executed a beautiful, flawless swoon, landing right at Despereaux's feet. Now you've done it, said the first hood. It doesn't matter, said the second hood. Step over her. We have a job to do. Nobody's mother's going to stop us. To the dungeon. To the dungeon, repeated the first hood, but his voice, so deep and certain a moment ago, now shook a tiny bit. He put a paw on Despereaux and tugged him forward, and the two hoods and Despereaux stepped over Antoinette. The crowd parted. The mice began to chant, "To the dungeon, to the dungeon, to the dungeon!" And the drumbeat continued, boom, 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 and Despereaux was led away. At the last moment, Antoinette came out of her faint and shouted one word to her child. And that word, reader, was adieu. Do you know the definition of adieu? Don't bother with your dictionary. I will tell you. Adieu is a French word for farewell. Farewell is not the word that you would like to hear from your mother as you are being led to the dungeon by two oversized mice in black hoods. Words that you would like to hear are, "Take me instead. I will go to the dungeon in my son's place." There is a great deal of comfort in those words. But reader, there is no comfort in the word farewell, even if you say it in French. Farewell is a word that, in any language, is full of sorrow. It is a word that promises absolutely nothing. Before we continue with this last chapter, I want you to think, have you ever been in a situation where someone said something to you and it just made you feel worse? It didn't help at all? Or maybe you said something to someone that made them feel worse and didn't help at all. Sometimes if we don't know what to say and really don't have the right words to say, because in some situations it's really hard to give advice or have words, especially if it's very sad, sometimes the best thing to do is to say nothing at all. Here we are, chapter 13, Perfidy Unlimited. Together, the three mice traveled down, down, down. The thread around Despereaux's neck was tight. He felt as if it was choking him. He tugged at it with one paw. "Don't touch the thread," barked the second hood. "Yeah," echoed the first hood. "Don't touch the thread." They moved quickly, and whenever Despereaux slowed, one of the two hoods poked him in the shoulder and told him to keep moving. They went through holes in the wall and down golden stairs. They went past rooms with doors that were closed and doors that were flung wide. The three mice traveled across marble floors and under heavy velvet drapes. They moved through warm patches of sunlight and dark pools of shade. This, thought Despereaux, was the world he was leaving behind, the world that he knew and loved. And somewhere in it, the Princess P was laughing and smiling and clapping her hands to music, unaware of Despereaux's fate. That he would not be able to let the princess know what had become of him seemed suddenly unbearable to the mouse. "Would it be possible for me to have one last word with the princess?" Despereaux asked. "A word?" said the second hood. "You want a word with a human?" "I want to tell her what has happened to me." "Oh, geez," said the first hood. He stopped and stamped a paw on the floor in frustration. "Cripes, you can't learn, can you?" And the voice was terribly familiar to Despereaux. "Furlough?" he said. "What?" said the first hood irritably. Despereaux shuddered. His own brother was delivering him to the dungeon. His heart stopped beating and shrunk to a small, cold, disbelieving pebble. But then, just as quickly, it leapt alive again, beating with hope. "Furlough," Despereaux said, and he took one of his brother's paws in his own. "Please let me go. Please, I'm your brother." Furlough rolled his eyes. He took his paw out of Despereaux's. "No," he said. "No way." "Please," said Despereaux. "No," said Furlough. "Rules are rules." Reader, do you recall the word perfidy? As our story progresses, perfidy becomes an ever more appropriate word, doesn't it? Perfidy was certainly the word that was in Despereaux's mind as the mice finally approached the narrow, steep stairs that led to the black hole of the dungeon. They stood, the 3 mice, 2 with hoods and 1 without, and contemplated the abyss before them. And then Furlough stood up on his hind legs and placed his right paw over his heart. "For the good of the castle mice," he announced to the darkness, "we deliver this day to the dungeon a mouse in need of punishment. He is, according to the laws we have established, wearing the red thread of death." And here is a picture of the 2 mice, one which we now have learned was Furlough, delivering him to his death. And it says here, Despereaux shuddered. His own brother was delivering him to the dungeon. "The red thread of death," repeated Despereaux in a small voice. Wearing the red thread of death was a terrible phrase, but the mouse didn't have long to consider its implications because he was suddenly pushed from behind by the hooded mice. The push was a strong one, and it sent Despereaux flying down the stairs into the dungeon. As he tumbled, whisker over tail, through the darkness, there were only 2 words in his mind. One was perfidy, and the other word that he clung to was P. Perfidy, P, perfidy, P. These were the words that pinwheeled through Despereaux's mind as his body descended into the darkness. And we'll stop there, reader. And perfidy, I have a job for you. I want you to look up the word perfidy if you can't figure out what it means by now. But know that that is the word that Despereaux thought of as his brother was delivering him to the dungeon, perfidy. So what do you think perfidy means? And have you ever been in a situation such as Despereaux in that you have felt betrayed and hurt by those that love you and are closest to you? And I wonder, why didn't they have the bravery themselves to stop this? Instead, they helped take their brother to his punishment. My goodness, I wonder what's going to happen next. I can't wait to find out during the next Reading Adventures with Miss Price. Until next time.